What Really Happened radio show for the America First, Second, and Third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Thursday, May 16th, 2013. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little technical note. If you are on a Windows machine and you use the Windows Time Server to synchronize your clocks, you may want to hold off a day on that. It's been sending out junk data this morning. It reset my desktop computer to sometime next year, and it just caused all kinds of problems. So just give them a little time to fix that situation. A couple of program notes. Of course, next Monday, Cindy Sheehan will be on our program talking about her recent bike ride or peace activism. On Monday, May 28th, Richard Mack is returning to talk about his Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association conference that is coming up at the first of next month. Now, yesterday, we were pointing out it was the 65th commemoration, 65th year of the Nakba, the tragedy, when Israel basically grabbed a piece of Palestine, said, this is now Israel, and all of you people who've been living here for thousands of years have to get out. And I made the interesting point that as much as Israel works to constantly keep the official legend of World War II before our eyes and ears and nose and all the rest of that in the corporate media, that they work very hard to try and erase the Nakba. And we are finding out today that apparently yesterday Facebook was closing every Facebook account trying to commemorate the Palestinian Nakba. So just sort of confirms what I was saying about that. All right, obviously the big scandals continue today. Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, EPA Gate, whatever, all of them there. And we're starting to really look at this whole idea that we've got another Richard Nixon in the White House. Jay Leno was even making that comment on his show. Yeah, we're there. We're in Nixon territory. And we're finding out this IRS scandal is going way beyond the intentional harassment and delaying of nonprofit status for conservative activist groups. We're finding out that IRS audits were being used to punish Obama's political enemies. Mitt Romney's major donors all got hit with IRS audits. Apparently, the IRS has been caught denying tax-exempt status to pro-life nonprofits in order to prop up Planned Parenthood and population control agendas. So this is all starting out to be just the tip of the iceberg. And we're basically seeing the IRS used as a tool of complete political control, not just of the individual taxpayer, because that's the whole IRS model. We're going to take your money away from you, and as long as you live your lives and spend your money the way we think you ought to, we'll give you a little of that money back. That's basically the mechanism. And now we're finding out that it is an impoverishment mechanism directed at those who oppose government policy. If somebody is out there saying something you don't want to hear, you make sure they are stripped of all their available wealth so they will stay silent. Well, that doesn't really work all that well in the age of the Internet, but that seems to be the thinking. Now, the Tea Party has come out with a story, or a revelation, that the IRS, along with the long delays about nonprofit status, was asking the Tea Party for copies of all their speeches and the names of employers. And at that point, the Tea Party said this is really not appropriate because this is not information the IRS needs or even has a justification for. Now, we're going to take a break for commercials here. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. And when we come back, we're going to continue talking about this, and I'm going to give you a roadmap for what I think is really going on, and it is not pretty. We will be right back. America, welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about all the gates that are propping up all around the White House, Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service. And there's an interesting article over at From the Trenches World Report basically saying the IRS criminality proves big government is lawless, unrestrained, and utterly out of control. And this is an impression that is only being reinforced by Barack Obama standing up there and saying, I had no idea. I found out about it when you did, which, by the way, Jon Stewart on The Daily Show took Obama to task about that, saying, do not stand there and say you only found out about this when we did. The point being, though, when Obama stands up there and says he had no idea what the IRS and the Department of Justice were doing, when that is his job as president, he's basically saying, I'm incompetent, I'm clueless, and he should follow it with, I resign. And again, this was an impeachable offense. It was an article of impeachment against President Richard M. Nixon. And we're seeing all these people grandstanding and saying, well, we need a new law, we need more restrictions, we need more controls. Well, didn't you promise you were going to do that back after Nixon was caught using the IRS as a political weapon? There were laws put in place back then. They were not being enforced. And it seems like a model of modern American federal government that every time the government is caught ignoring and refusing to enforce older laws and something blows up, they say, well, we'll pass a new law. All righty, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. We're going to start with Carol in Idaho. Aloha, Carol. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. About this IRS gate, maybe we could think a little deeper, and I want to see if you agree with my suspicion. I was talking with a couple of friends yesterday, and I said, why do you think that the media, is being so frank and exposing the dirty laundry of the IRS coming after the Tea Party-type patriots? Mm-hmm. And nobody knew. Well, today I got an email, I could forward it to you, that says that, wait a minute, here it is. The reason that they're exposing this is coming back again for another push toward a national sales tax, or what they call fair tax. You see, there are millions of Americans who have fought off the IRS in recent decades because they found out they were frauds.
Yes.
Now, if this stupid Congress will pass a law making a flat tax, I don't care if it's 17%. If it's 17% today, it can be 29% next year, and on and on and on, you see. So I think it is a ploy to get everybody upset with the IRS again so that they will vote in a flat tax or a national sales tax or a global
I don't
tax.
know that that's the motive. Certainly when one of these scandals breaks, everybody out there, first thing they think is, how can I use this to push my agenda? And absolutely, anybody who is very upset with the IRS, people who are aware the 16th Amendment wasn't actually ratified and the rest of it, they're all saying, yeah, we're going to use this to keep pushing forward. So I have no doubt that we're seeing a renewed push to get rid of the IRS and impose either a national sales tax or a flat tax or something that's a little bit more fair and equitable. But I don't think the people who are behind the fair tax and flat tax had anything to do with causing this or have anything to do with the corporate media paying a lot of attention on this. First of all, the corporate media loves a good scandal because that builds their audience, and right now they're desperate for audience numbers and advertiser revenues. The main reason they're covering all these scandals is they know it's already out here on the independent media, and if they don't cover it, it becomes obvious they're not covering it. I'm already seeing people commenting on the fact that CNN and MSNBC are trying to downplay and minimize this stuff. But they have to report it or it becomes obvious they are complicit in whatever is being covered up.
Right.
Okay.
Well, instead of putting all Americans back in the barnyard, as it were, how about get rid of IRS and letting the sheeple out, the ones that are still prisoner, and let's have an American-type economy instead of what we've got here.
Well, absolutely. I'm in favor of abolishing the Internal Revenue Service. We should abolish it along with that Federal Reserve System. That's not the economy this nation was started with. This nation was started with public currency as a public utility. Government-issued money that did not accrue interest to anybody, and it worked so well. There was no income tax for 100 years, and the nation got on just fine and was not buried in hopeless debt.
That's right.
And so the whole thing is hijacked. And yes, let's get rid of the IRS. But at the same time, we've got to complete the job. You don't cut out part of a cancer and let the rest of it continue to metastasize. We have to take out that entire Federal Reserve private-owned central bank model. It has run its course. It is a complete failure for everybody except the owners of the bank. It is a scam, and it's time for it to go.
Right. Michael, what day did you say that Richard Mack would be on your show?
28th.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to switch over to John in Chicago. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Well, first of all, I'm going to say aloha to you because I'm in Chicago and it's like 83 degrees and sunny here.
Okay.
So I'm not jealous of where you are.
Well, it's only 75 degrees here.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm winning. Woohoo!
Al Gore loves you.
There you go. Listen, I just wanted to share with you. I'm a convert to the Republic Broadcasting Network now from the Daily Paul because I just got sick of arguing with idiots over there. But I want to let you know there's a radio station out of Milwaukee called Voice of Christian Youth, VCY, and they used to be really good, and they're always 8 years behind the times, and they catch up on things, and these Obama scandals get them all, they get them all excited. They're really angry about it. It's righteous indignation, but they keep pushing the Israel agenda. And last week they had a guy on there, and his name is Yosama Diktak, or I don't know how to say his name.
Okay.
He grew up in Egypt. He wasn't born a Muslim. He knew the Muslim faith backwards and forwards. Then his dad became a Baptist pastor, I guess, so he converted to Christianity. And now he's converted the Quran and the Hadith into English, and he's running around selling it. And he was on the program for a whole hour, and he was sitting there saying when he talks to Muslims and he witnesses to them that 85% of them don't even know what's in the Quran or the Hadith about, killing.
That could be true. That could be said for pretty much every religion that's out there. In fact, if you remember the early history of Christianity, the laity were not even allowed to read the Bible. It was just you rely on the priests to tell you what's in there and what it means, and everybody was constantly changing it back and forth, which is why after Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and started putting out the Gutenberg Bible, it eventually led to such a conflict theologically that they had to standardize the Bible under the King James. So the vast majority, and I know this myself from experience, the vast majority of people professing to any religion rarely really understand completely what is inside their so-called holy scriptures. And I like to joke about, people say, how'd you become an atheist? And I say, well, I was raised Congregationalist, and I sang in the church choir, and I got my little pin with all the little year markers down there. And then as a gift for being in the choir, the church gave me the Bible, and that was their downfall because I actually read it.
Okay.
But that's something that you could say that about a lot of religions. They don't know what's in there. They just accept what they're told by the child molester in the funny robes at the front of the building, and they go home and think, hey, I'm going to survive being dead, and I gave my money, and that's all they need to know. And it's a very irresponsible way to be following a religion, but it is very, very common. So thanks an awful lot, John. Well, what?
Can I finish?
Yeah, real quick.
What I did is I called in the radio program, and I told him, I said, the greater threat to America is the Christians professing to have a salvation they don't actually possess because 85% of them don't know what's in the Bible. And what I did is I advanced the three theories on 9/11 to him. I said either it was a surprise attack, the government made it happen, or the government let it happen. He said, I do not buy your theory, and I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm like, I gave you three theories. See, they're still pushing the Islamic boogeyman thing, and that's where the problem is, the chirp. They won't wake up to 9/11.
Well, you need to understand that most of the corporate media and even some of the independent media are dependent on large donors who will come in, and when that money comes in, there are strings attached to it. And they'll say, it's okay for you to bash Obama, but don't go out and question the orthodoxy of Israel or the orthodoxy of 9/11. And one of the reasons I like being here at Republic Broadcasting is there is no large corporate funding source for what we're doing here. In fact, this is a plea for donations to Republic Broadcasting because they need your help right now. And as a result, that is why we're able to basically go where the facts of a story take us, and we don't have somebody looking over our shoulder saying, you shouldn't talk about that.
I agree.
Okay?
I agree. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot, John. Going to let you go here. And let's see. Out in Colorado, U.S. Representative Cory Gardner is demanding to know what groups in his state, Colorado, were targeted by the Internal Revenue Service. And this idea that Obama firing the acting chief of the IRS, and by the way, the acting chief of the IRS is saying, well, I was supposed to leave next month anyway, so it really isn't all that big of a deal. But apparently Obama thought, we'll throw this guy under a bus, and that'll be the end of it. Richard Nixon made exactly the same mistake. Nobody's buying it. Nobody's buying this idea that the IRS did this all on their own, and the president had no knowledge of it. Remember, Jake Carney, the White House spokesdrone, admitted the White House had been aware of this several weeks ago, the day after Obama said, I found out about it when you guys did, last Friday on the TV news. So they're already self-contradictory, and we know they're lying. They're already, we don't even need to know the details. Once we catch them in a contradiction, that tells you they are lying. Because if they're telling you the truth, automatically by default, you don't get contradictions. You don't get two different versions of when things happened. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America, and welcome back to the show. And I want to respond to one of the comments made by the previous callers about going into either a blog or a radio station or a chat room or a press conference and seeing people stand up and try and defend the indefensible with regard to all of this. And yes, we know that people who owe favors to Obama or who are trying to protect the Democratic Party's chances for re-election in 2016 are going to say whatever comes to mind to try and keep this scandal under control. We had Jake Carney the other day basically saying the Republicans are faking the Benghazi emails, which now we know why he said that. We'll get into that in a little bit. But over at Activist Post, they have an article by James Hall on the IRS is a political hit squad. And everybody recognizes it for what it was because those of you who are my age remember what it was like back when Nixon was doing this stuff. And we all have a long, long memory. And what the point of this article is saying is for every one crime revealed by the Internal Revenue Service, you may presume it's just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more that's been going on that we don't know about. And that certainly is proving to be true, because when this scandal was first leaked by Lois Lerner, it was just about delaying the applications for tax-exempt status to conservative groups, specifically the Tea Party. Originally it was just all about the Tea Party. That was it. And it started ballooning as others came forward to say, no, we got the same treatment. And then we had that news anchor out of KMOV in St. Louis came out and said he was being harassed by the IRS following his interview with Obama. College professors are saying they've been targeted. Then it came out that Mitt Romney's main donors were all hit with audits. And so this thing is blooming wildly, wildly out of control. Now, the official line, let me rephrase that, the official propaganda we're getting from the White House is, oh, it was just these two out-of-control rogue employees down at the Cincinnati office of the Internal Revenue Service who just took it upon themselves to cause all of this ruckus. But it's being reported in the British press, have not seen it in the American media yet, that the letters that went out to the Tea Party and these other groups that were being harassed originated in Washington, D.C., and from California offices of the IRS. So this idea of trying to contain the disaster by saying it's just these rogues in Cincinnati is already blown. The cover is blown. These letters were coming from the IRS in Washington, D.C. itself, and these satellite offices out in California. Now, speaking of Lois Lerner, who is at the heart of this entire mess, only because she's the one who leaked this, supposedly, and I'll get into that in a little bit. She's gotten $42,000 in bonuses between 2009 and 2011. She's very well paid for what she's doing. I don't even know what her base salary is. We do know that people who work in the tax grab industry, because of their moral complications, they are paid quite a bit more than people working in the private sector. Technically, the IRS is private sector because it's owned by the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is a privately owned banking cartel. Interesting little story, just a sort of kind of a humorous protest, if you will. There's this NFL player, Philadelphia Eagles offensive lineman, Evan Mathis, who basically took a picture of himself appearing to relieve himself on the sign in front of an IRS building, and he sent it out through Instagram, and everybody's laughing about that, and it certainly captures the popular opinion of the IRS right now, but I'm sure that Evan just made the IRS's special high-interest targets list. Think about that one for a little while here. Now, getting over to the Department of Justice and their surveillance of AP phone records without informing AP that we're going to do it, without allowing the opportunity for AP to come back and say, wait a minute, you can't just get all of our phone records if there is really a national security investigation. You know, who are the suspects, and go after them. But as I've been saying all along since this broke, there really isn't any real investigation. It is a blanket attempt to scare the corporate media as a whole into not talking with anybody, to accept the official government pronouncements and report that as the straight news. And they've done it before. They did it back in 2006 with ABC News, when suspicions were starting to surface that Saddam Hussein really didn't have nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And back in 2006, it appeared to work. Different story completely today. And we have these articles coming out, like from Ex-Republic TV, saying, the Obama administration is using the Department of Justice and the FBI to go after journalists doing their job. Remember, the reason the Founding Fathers gave that protection, freedom of speech, to the press, was so the press could do their job of exposing government wrongdoing to the public, to keep that government subservient to the people. That was the design objective behind the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this Department of Justice casting a wide net over the Associated Press and probably other media outlets as well. And it's prompted a lot of criticism. They're impeding the ability of the press to operate freely and to report on government wrongdoing, which is the traditional role of the corporate media, or any media, including the independent media. And it even drew criticism from Russia's foreign minister, saying they think freedom of the press, freedom of speech in the U.S. is very much under threat. And when you've got the Russians telling you that you have a problem with freedom of speech, you've got a problem with freedom of speech. You really do here. We're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, the Obamacare, synopsis, whatever you want to call it. How did they figure out that 40 million people didn't have health insurance, number one? And number two, some people have to feed their kids and pay their rent, which is very important. And I think car insurance is actually more important than health insurance, especially if you don't want to pay for a Western model of insurance. I mean, I don't. I use other alternative types of, besides blood tests, of course, I might go get a blood test. But I guess two questions. How did they know how did they even know that I had some other kind of I don't have insurance. I just pay out of my pocket, and I don't use Western model insurance. So how did they factor that into the 40 million?
Okay, well, let me. It's not done on an individual basis. All they did, remember, most of Obamacare was written by lobbyists for the health insurance companies. And these health insurance companies got together and said, how many policies have you sold? Oh, I've sold this many, you've sold that many. And they total them all up, subtract it from the total American population, and they say, oh, we've still got another 40 million customers out there that we can get at by making it all mandatory. And that's how that number was arrived at. And you're absolutely right. Americans right now are in this horrible situation where in order to pay for this now mandatory health insurance, or the fine that the Internal Revenue Service will levy on you if you don't have health insurance, it comes down to, do I pay the rent? Do I feed my family? Do I pay all this mandated government spending? And a lot of people don't have enough money to cover all of that. But for the money junkies who are behind these scams, they don't care if you're going hungry. They don't even care if you lose your home, as long as they're getting whatever is left of your available wealth. Now, I am actually opposed to the idea of government mandating that you buy certain things, because they already have all your tax money. They can go and spend that any way they think is good for the public, but to come on out and tell you, you must pay for this, you must pay for that, it's another form of obfuscated, but it's still taxation, because you're not allowed to spend your money on what you want. They're saying, we're take your money, we're going to give you back a portion of it, but you will spend it where we tell you to spend it. on earpieces for your cell phone while you're driving, on car insurance is mandated, health insurance is mandated, you must have this or that safety equipment present, and so forth and so on. Now, I think most Americans who are earning decent living are going to go ahead and of their own accord get car insurance and health insurance, and the little earpiece for the cell phone. They don't need the government to tell them to do that. The only people impacted by this government coming out and saying you must buy this or that are the people who really can't afford it. And of course, what we saw with the auto insurance situation, before auto insurance was mandatory, when the American people could say yes or no, the auto insurance companies had to be attractive. They had to have low premiums and good service and take care of their customers. Once it was mandatory, the premium rates went right through the roof, and the quality of service just went right down into the Al-Qaeda. And the same thing is certainly, it's already proving to be true under Obamacare.
Right. Right, exactly. I think it's a tax. And another thing, what if I have religious objections? I mean, they keep people in fear, you know. I'm in fear now that I'm going to have, 2 or 3 papers to look at. I might have to get an affidavit. I might have to hire a lawyer because I don't believe in Western abortions or something, you know, because I'm a conservative Catholic.
Well,
right?
yeah,
So I think
that's an issue. That is an issue you're going to have to take up with a lawyer if you're going to try and challenge Obamacare. Now, the good news is there is another effort in the House of Representatives to repeal Obamacare, and Obama has succeeded in seriously angering the Congress against himself right now. We're going to be talking about that a little bit further down in the show. So, Mike, going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. Thank you for accepting the call. You're talking about truth and contradiction in regards to the White House. I think that perhaps the next signal that will come out is when Obama declares executive privilege and refuses to answer any questions.
Didn't work for Nixon. Didn't work for Nixon with his tapes.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
All right.
And by the way, I did put my dog away.
Okay, yes, now I remember who you are.
Yeah. But anyways, I wanted to say that if Obama starts using executive privilege, I mean, that's a red light.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, Dan, we're going to let you go. Your phone connection's kind of tearing up, and we're going to let you go. I want to finish up on these gates and my conclusion about what's going on here before we take any more phone calls here. Anyway, Attorney General Eric Holder is already trying to basically isolate himself from this. He's gone out and said that he is 95 to 99% certain that his assistant was the one who authorized the subpoena of the Associated Press phone records. So they're pointing fingers at each other. The rats are eating each other. I absolutely like it. Now, here's a breaking story that is just now coming out. Because apparently the Department of Justice, in addition to getting the phone records of Associated Press, apparently put taps on the phones inside the United States Congress. And this is coming from California Congressman Devin Nunes. And he's saying, you know, these phones were tapped in rooms where members of Congress have informal conversations or they make phone calls to their staff off the cell phones. And so now Obama and the Department of Justice have seriously pissed off the United States Congress just as that repeal of Obamacare comes to the floor. Now, under duress from the Congress, the White House finally released more of the emails regarding what happened at Benghazi, and it shouldn't be too big of a surprise. These emails directly contradict the earlier White House claims about who shaped those talking points about what happened in Benghazi. And basically, Jay Carney had come out, and Hillary Clinton had come out, saying that the revisions of the talking points had come from the CIA, and the emails show that it was all coming from the Obama administration officials, and in particular the State Department. In other words, the White House lied. We've already caught them in another lie on this situation here. Now, I want to talk about this very interesting story that came out regarding exactly how the IRS scandal became public. And this is a story coming out of TPM Mudraker. And it's talking about how on Friday, May 10th, Lois Lerner was at a question and answer session regarding the IRS and the law, and the very last question taken was about this Tea Party situation. And Lois Lerner had a very long, drawn-out answer, and people in the audience were noticing she was reading from note cards, as if she had prepared the answer in advance. And the suspicion in the audience was the question itself had been planted. They planned for this question to be asked and for Lerner to answer with this very damaging revelation about the IRS going after the Tea Party. And so what I think is going on here is the White House. We're seeing a cascade of very poor decision-making coming out of the White House, which again raises the question how many of them are on SSRIs. Benghazi has been turning into a major, major issue. If my theory is correct, that Benghazi started as a staged event to bolster Obama's re-election chances, and this staged event went horribly wrong, this is a great secret. Nobody in Washington, D.C. wants to come out, not even Obama's worst enemies. So on Friday, May 10th, Lois Lerner basically gives out this story about the IRS harassing the Tea Party days before the official IG report comes out. So what I think was going on is the White House was thinking they were going to trigger a minor scandal, something they thought would be survivable, in order to distract from the bigger scandal behind Benghazi. And if you remember back during the Clinton years, Ken Starr did exactly the same thing. He waved that stained blue dress and Monica Lewinsky all over to distract the media and the public from the real scandals behind Whitewater, which was government-sanctioned drug smuggling and the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. So at roughly the same time as Lerner was leaking this story into the media, we get the announcement from the Department of Justice that they have been putting Associated Press phone records under surveillance. This appears to have been an attempt to scare the corporate media into staying on the reservation. Don't talk to anybody that is not officially sanctioned. Don't try and be the new Woodward and Bernstein. And remember, the U.S. government did exactly the same thing against ABC News in 2006. Back when it was becoming an important question. Were there really weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? And, of course, we now know the answer for that was no. So the release of these two admissions together is likely not a coincidence. The White House game appears to have been to scare the media off of pursuing the truth behind Benghazi and give them something else to report on, to cover a huge scandal with what they thought was going to be a smaller scandal. But the best laid plans of mice and politicians gang after glee, and the IRS scandal is exploding into a major event because it wasn't just the Tea Party, and all these other conservative groups are coming forward to saying they were harassed, their tax-exempt status was blocked, they were audited, and it's just cascading completely out of control. And because of the inevitable association with Richard Nixon's use of the IRS as a political tool, it's gaining traction both in the corporate media and in the public mind. And, of course, this implied threat against AP, unlike ABC in 2006, it's provoked a huge, furious backlash. And now the corporate media is no longer on the side of the White House, to whatever extent they were before. Now they're very angry. And now, of course, Congress is very upset because their phones were being tapped. So what I am seeing here is a White House so totally out of touch with the public. They're carrying out propaganda operations based on a complete misread of how the public and the media are going to react. Now, back in 1972, David Halberstam wrote a book, The Best and the Brightest, about the series of Charlie Foxtrots by the Kennedy and Johnson administrations that resulted in the Vietnam War. So I think the book that will eventually be written about Obama's second term ought to be titled The Worst and the Stupidest. Now, earlier today, Obama had a press conference that was basically teased to the public that he may or may not answer questions about Benghazi and IRS Gate and DOJ Gate and the rest of it. But, of course, the focus of the press conference was Syria. Syria is a crisis. Syria is a crisis. And so it looks to me like the invasion of Syria is on, so that Obama can use blood and gore and flying bodily parts to distract the media and public from Benghazi, IRS, DOJ, EPA Gate, which is not unlike when Bill Clinton launched cruise missiles at an aspirin factory in Sudan, just as Monica Lewinsky was testifying about their sexual dalliances. This is how the game works. Change the story, change the focus. Bombing in Beirut, huge embarrassment to the U.S. 24 hours later, they invade Grenada. And again, the White House may be misreading the public reactions to a new war, along with the reaction of a now inflamed and angry corporate media. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Jon Stewart came out swinging at Obama last night. You can't keep saying you found out about the news at the same time as us, and of course, that claim is already discredited by Jay Carney himself. So they're looking for distractions. They need distractions, and they're already starting to see them pour in here. Out in Los Angeles, they closed 10 East Los Angeles schools. They locked them down because of a single phone call saying, I'm coming there with an assault rifle to shoot people. No guns, no nothing. One phone call, they get a news event to throw up there to try and cloud over. And remember, in order to find out what's really going on, you want to look for the most protected point, where all the distractions and cover-ups overlap. That most protected point is the story. And I think it's Benghazi. And everything I have seen come out about Benghazi so far only supports my theory that Benghazi was a staged incident, kidnap the ambassador, hold him hostage for a few days. Obama sends in the special forces or the SEAL teams to rescue him. Obama looks like a hero for the election. And it blew up in his face because they did not anticipate the Libyan people living right around the consulate were going to hear the gunfire and join on in because they hate their new U.S.-approved puppet government. They hate their new U.S.-approved private central bank. And again, it was a misread of the potential public reaction by a White House that is totally out of touch with how people are really feeling out here in the real world. And again, are they all on SSRIs? Because their decision-making skills are really, really crap. We're going to grab a phone call. Bob in California, I'm going to let you start, but I'm telling you right now, we're going to have to take a pause for commercials and take you into the next segment.
Thank you. I'll hold.
Oh, you're going to hold. Okay.
Yeah, I'll hold.
All right. And, of course, the gun grabbers are out there screaming about this school lockdown. Excuse me. Pardon me. Having a little bit of problem with my voice. Wow. I don't know where that came from. And just give me a minute here. All right. Yeah, now I'm back. So as gun sales continue to soar, spurred by Obama's gun grab, gun crime continues to plummet. And it only reminds everybody that the more guns are out there in the law-abiding citizens, the less violent crime there'll be. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take that phone call now. Bob in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Pacific Standard Time, Michael.
Yes, well, still morning out here in Hawaii.
Okay. Normally, I've been following you for over 20 years now, and normally you and I look at things differently, but today you and I are staring at the same 8 ball for the same exact reason.
Okay.
You and I understand that in politics nothing happens by accident. We understand that the IRS scandal and the AP scandal is nothing more than a smokescreen for Benghazi.
Yes.
Plain and simple as that. Shame on the mainstream media for taking it hook, line, and sinker. And shame on Speaker Boehner. He revealed himself yesterday to be nothing more than an agent for Obama when he stood up and said, let's not talk about impeachment, let's talk about who's going to jail. I'm not fooled one bit. So I'm glad to hear that you and I agree on this one very thing. We're looking at the same 8 ball today, and We need to get that attention back on to Benghazi, because I think it is not what everyone wants others to think what it really was.
Absolutely.
It wasn't an embassy. It was something else.
Well, it's almost irrelevant to what was really going on in this consulate, and I know a lot of people are saying the CIA was using it as a venue for gun running and gun smuggling, which is not surprising. When you look at any of the U.S. embassies, their people generally are intelligence assets. Russia just arrested and persona non grata a U.S. embassy employee there, exposed as a CIA spy. They've kicked him out of the country. So, yeah, the consulates and embassies are also intelligence operations, and because of their protected status as sovereign territory, and the local authorities can't go in there, yeah, they're used as a base for all kinds of operations. I mean, some of these ambassadors have been caught using the diplomatic pouch to smuggle contraband that they're not supposed to have. They take advantage of the situation for both official and personal reasons.
I don't know what it is, but here's my simple logic behind it. Here's my simple logic. Let's say it's true that someone recommended an increase in security, and let's say it's true that that increase was denied or rejected by Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
That alone tells you, despite recommendations, that it was not an embassy. It was something else other than an embassy. It was not there to carry out normal State Department functions and activities.
Well, let me come back.
They would have in the normal course accepted the increased security, but they didn't.
No, if Stevens was in on the plan to be made a world news figure by pretending to be a hostage, that would also be a reason for him to reject additional security in order to keep the stage clear, for this special operations group playing terrorists to come in, stage a kidnapping and fake hostage crisis for Obama to come in and resolve to look good for the November election, which is still what I think happened. And the fact that the fact that so many people rejected an increase in security at that location supports the idea that whole thing was just a staged incident. Got to take a break for station identification. Bob, thanks a lot for the phone call, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we were mentioning before, the White House has finally been forced to turn over some of their emails to Congress regarding Benghazi, and they are already contradicting the White House's version of events, that all of the modifications to the talking points came from the CIA. And one of the emails that surfaced was from former head of the CIA, David Petraeus, who said, frankly, I don't want to use this. And he was objecting to Obama's version of what happened in Benghazi, which, of course, is the reason he was forced out of his position, supposedly for an extramarital affair. And I don't approve of extramarital affairs, but let's face it, if you're going to start firing people over having a little on the side, half of Washington, D.C. would be cleaning out their desks right now. And so it's obviously very much coming out that the White House was lying about Benghazi. They're lying about who was changing the narrative about Benghazi. They're looking for somebody to pin it on. And every one of these revelations that comes out continues to support my theory that what happened at Benghazi was supposed to be a staged event that Obama could use to reassure his re-election chances, and it got horribly, horribly out of control. And that's the big, deep, dark, ugly secret they're trying to keep, and that's why they're throwing up this IRS thing as a distraction. The Department of Justice went after AP to try and scare the corporate media into basically going along with the agenda of pay no attention to Benghazi. It's a sideshow. Go over here and rag on the IRS because everybody hates them anyway, and those guys are used to it. But the AP story has now blown up into a scandal of its own accord, and the original IRS story of harassing the Tea Party has now bloomed way beyond that. Very, very poor decision-making on the part of the White House planners. Now then, getting back to the gun grabber issue. Down in Missouri, there is an individual named John Negri, West Plains, Missouri, small businessman, who has offered free land to any gun manufacturer that's located in a state passing these ridiculous gun laws to move to Missouri and set up business there and create jobs. He's just going to give them the land. to get them over there. It's a huge incentive. Over in Robeson County, North Carolina, a new ammunition company is setting up business there, going to create 150 jobs. Meanwhile, a very interesting story came out a little earlier today, how the White House is now launching a campaign to convince the clergy of America to promote gun control. Remember that whole thing about separation of church and state? Obviously, the White House doesn't seem to feel all that much about it. They want your pastors, your ministers, your fathers, your rabbis, your imams, whatever, to use their churches to convince everybody that God hates guns. You've got to surrender. Guns are the tools of the devil, unless you're in the armed forces, and then, of course, you're doing God's work. And along the line of all these distractions that they're just throwing out there like spaghetti on the wall, trying to take the focus off Benghazi, to a lesser extent IRS and DOJ scandals, they ran this story earlier today, long after the events are already over. It took a long time, supposedly, for this to come out, that the Boston bombing suspect Dzhokhar Tsarnaev wrote a note on the inside of the boat he was hiding in while bleeding to death from the earlier gun battle. Didn't have a gun, but somehow managed to have himself a ballpoint pen. And even though he was bleeding and dying, he wrote a note in which he basically said, oh, Muslim this, Muslim that, and I'm not buying this. And from the email I'm getting, nobody else is buying this. It's just an attempt to so demonize the Tsarnaevs in the media to cement the official myth, even as more and more evidence of cover-up, fraud, and deception continue to surface. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as I mentioned earlier this morning, Obama had a press conference together with Turkey's Erdogan talking about the Syrian crisis. And obviously, when you have a whole bunch of domestic scandals at home, what do? You go and start dropping bombs on other people as a distraction. Like I said, Clinton did it on the day that Monica Lewinsky was testifying about stains on her blue dress before Congress. Clinton ordered a cruise missile attack on an aspirin factory in Sudan, claimed it was a biological weapons laboratory, turned out to be wrong. You, the American taxpayer, not only paid for those $1 million each cruise missiles, you got to pay to rebuild the aspirin factory when the owners sued for wrongful destruction. So Syria is definitely in play, and once again, my hat tip has to go to Vladimir Putin, who's trying to keep this thing from going any further than it already has. We already know that Russian Black Sea naval vessels are basically tooling around the eastern Mediterranean. They are now being joined by Russian warships from Russia's Pacific Fleet. They have transited over to enter the Mediterranean. They're planning on docking in Cyprus. I think it's a total of 11 Russian warships now in the area. They are sending a clear message. Do not go into Syria. Do not go into Iran. And unfortunately, Israel's belligerence is continuing. And right now, Obama needs the war to escalate as a distraction from the deteriorating economy and all of these scandals which they brought on themselves. It's all self-created crises, and nobody in that White House is able to stand up and actually accept responsibility for what they've done. They're dumping it on the Department of Justice. They're firing the acting head of the IRS, who was going to leave next month anyway. They're just finger-pointing. That's how politicians are. They'll take credit for anything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. And anything bad happens, they find somebody to blame. It's Emmanuel Goldstein. Go have your 2-minute hate about him. Now, Israel is backpedaling from their use of white phosphorus in Gaza. And the whole world saw the photos, even though Israel was trying to prevent electronic communication from getting out of Gaza to the world. It didn't succeed. People found ways around that. And as a result, there is now a court case coming up regarding the use of white phosphorus. It is a banned munition. The only exception is use as an illumination device, which means you have it up in the sky on a little parachute flare to light up the ground below. But when you're just showering it all over residential areas, and it will start fires. It's classed as a chemical weapon. It is banned under international law, and there are some legal ramifications coming up in the international courts of law. Israel recently stated they were going to abandon the use of white phosphorus. We're now getting the fine details, and it turns out, once again, Israel left itself a little trapdoor. They're saying the Israel's ban on white phosphorus is not a law. It is merely a policy, and we know policy can be changed with a phone call. So they're weasel wording their way around it. They're trying to act like, yes, they recognize using white phosphorus is wrong, but they're going to go back to using it anytime they feel they have a need to do so. Now, we were talking yesterday, in fact, about how these ultra-right-wing Israelis stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, guarded and escorted by Israeli armed forces. And it was a clear provocation. Now, that whole Temple Mount area, and frankly, as much as I love history and archaeology and all the rest of that, I think the best thing could happen to planet Earth is a meteor hit that place and just erase it from the planet, calm everybody down. But the Temple Mount is segregated by religion. The United Nations declared Jerusalem an international city to be shared among all the religions because of all the important religious sites that are there. And there is a section for Jewish worshippers, and a section for Muslim worshippers, and a section for Christian worshippers. And of course, the Jewish worshippers, they want it all. And so, the other day, these Israeli right-wingers stormed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is not part of the Jewish faith, and not supposed to be part of their area. And it's a provocation. They're hoping the Muslims will strike back, because then Israel has an excuse to launch another atrocity. Upping the ante on that, we hear that Israeli Knesset member Mordechai Yugev is now demanding a Jewish synagogue to be built in the Al-Aqsa Mosque courtyard. Right in front of the mosque, he wants to put up a synagogue. And that, too, is an intentional provocation. Now, the provocations are continuing in a whole bunch of directions. Israel's Netanyahu has sent a warning message to Syria's Assad that Israel's going to go on bombing Syria, and you'd better not strike back. We will bring you down if you retaliate from the future airstrikes. So Israel's psychotic worldview is they have a right to bomb anyone, anywhere, at any time, but the people being bombed have no right to fight back, which is kind of how they treat the Palestinians, if you think about it. Now, Iran's foreign minister has come out to say that Assad is so far unimpressed by Israeli attacks. I think it's an unwarranted piece of bravado. But he did include the comment that Syria will retaliate the next time Israel conducts an airstrike bombing mission over Syria. So now the stage is set for Israel to go in and bomb another chicken ranch inside Syria. Assad will strike back because he can only wait so long before his own people start saying, look, you've got to fight back. And that, of course, is what Netanyahu wants. The instant Syria launches an attack back, Israel has an open door to go in and flatten Syria. And this is Israel's standard operating procedure. We've seen it time and time again. Poke, 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 until somebody reacts, and then that reaction is declared the unreasonable, unprovoked attack on Israel, and the full-on war gets launched. And again, let's see, we're seeing this being reported over in the New York Times. Israel's dropping hints they're going to attack Syria again, and warning Syria, do not dare hit back at us. Does that even make sense? I think only in the mind of Netanyahu is that a reasonable statement. That's like the Confederacy telling Washington, D.C., we're going to bomb Fort Sumter, and don't you dare fight back at us. Of course, we know what Netanyahu's really doing. He's daring Assad to strike back. He wants Assad to strike back. Because then Israel and its obedient corporate media, who right now at the moment may not be as obedient as it was before, will claim that Syria's attack is the provocation. Oh, these little bombing runs by Israel into Syria, that was nothing. But Syria attacking Israel, that is the start of the war. And they'll be off into Syria, and the U.S. will go in right alongside them. And Russia's going to do whatever Russia's going to do. I don't think Russia will directly militarily intervene in Syria, but they will feel perfectly justified in starting to pour as much weapons and material and support as they can into Syria to turn it into the new Vietnam as they promised they were going to do. Why is Israel so hot and bothered to get Syria right at this moment? And by the way, latest report is Israeli armor and artillery is gathering in the Golan. They're getting ready to do this. Pull the plug. Could happen in the next few days. And Obama's going to say, yes, the media's got something else to talk about. Why has Netanyahu got such a burr under his saddle regarding Syria? Well, because this attempt to overthrow Assad has been going on for over 2 years, almost 2.5 years now. And the longer Syria withstands this, the more it undermines Israel's illusion of invulnerability or invincibility. They're not succeeding. Neither is the United States. It's embarrassing. These great nuclear powers are not able to get Assad out of office. And what that does is it encourages other countries that are being targeted by the U.S. and Israel to put on more of a resistance. The reason the Blitzkrieg worked in World War II was the first couple of countries the Nazis went into just collapsed. And every other country downwind was saying, we can't even begin to fight. Look how easily they got knocked over in these other countries. And nation to nation to nation to nation. But when the U.S. and Israel go in and try and overthrow Syria, and Syria survives for 2.5 years, all the other nations are saying, I guess the U.S. and Israel aren't as tough as we've been told. So let's dig in our heels and resist this incursion, this dollarification, this forced return to Bretton Woods. And that's what it's really all about, saving face. Assad's survival this long is a serious political embarrassment to both the United States and Israel. And Israel's got its own political embarrassments right now. Israel likes to bill itself as one of the world's providers of the most advanced drones, mostly because they take the money Congress gives them and they go out and buy drone companies, ship them to Israel and say, hey, we're Butch, we're the best. But apparently, there was another case where an Israeli drone was hijacked by a third party with the intention of steering it to a friendly landing field, like they did to that U.S. drone, and Israel wound up having to shoot down their own drone to keep it from falling into the hands of whoever hijacked it. That's another huge embarrassment, that Israel's drones aren't as advanced as we've been told. All righty. Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency have wrapped up their 10th round of nuclear talks. Depending upon who you talk to, they made significant progress or they hit a brick wall. And again, what came out of it that was concrete was Iran will do everything it needs to prove their nuclear program is peaceful. Of course, that's not what the U.S. and Israel want. They want Iran to scrap all their nuclear industry, their power station, medical isotopes. It's an all or nothing deal as far as they're concerned. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're still talking about the economy. We're talking about the absence of enforcement by the U.S. government or any government against the big money interests. It's like if you have enough zeros in your bank account, you're nobility, and you are not prosecuted anymore here. And we're now getting this story coming out of the Telegraph that the oil company executives who were caught rigging oil and gasoline prices to maximize their profits are not going to be prosecuted. Not going to happen. It's sort of like if Enron happened and Ken Lay basically got a get-out-of-jail-free card, which he may have gotten. It's very strange the way he, all of a sudden, just before his arrest, he died and was quickly cremated. I would not be surprised if he's actually down there in the Caymans playing canasta. And this gets me into this very interesting story regarding a lady named Kathleen Fury, who is a former employee of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And this is from the website senseonsense.com. And basically, she was a rising star at the SEC. And then in late 2007, Fury approached the Assistant Regional Director, George Stepaniak, her supervisor, to discuss an investigation that was supposed to be going on that seemed to be kind of floundering. And she was pointing out these investigations of investment companies and advisors on Wall Street, they just seemed to go nowhere, not at all. And Fury had a case that the specific person under suspicion at that time, and it's been redacted, but it may have been Bernie Madoff, had violated both the Investment Company Act of 1940 and the Investment Advisors Act of 1940, and Stepanek responded that his group does not do investment management cases. In other words, this supervisor at the SEC said that 2 of the 4 major securities acts that Congress and the Code of Federal Regulations had mandated the SEC and its staff to enforce weren't being enforced. And a reminder that Bernie Madoff with the loot did what he did, cheating his own investors out of $65 billion with a B over a space of 12 years, while people like Harry Markopoulos were coming into the SEC with the evidence of fraud gift-wrapped on a silver platter. And the SEC did nothing about it year after year after year after year. The few people from the SEC who went over to Madoff's operation didn't investigate. They handed him resumes. They wanted in on the party. And this is why Wall Street is completely out of control. No matter what they do, nobody gets arrested. Madoff got arrested. You remember the fury at the time? It was a shock. He was cheating other Jewish people. I'm not kidding. That was in the corporate media. That was the anger and fury at him. Everybody else is fair game. None of the masterminds, none of the CEOs of all these Wall Street firms who were behind the mortgage-backed security fraud of 2008, they've not been arrested, not investigated. None of them have gone to jail. Corporate crime steals from the American society every year at least 10 times what street crime does. But Hollywood and TV shows always, it's the street crime is the problem. Look at the muggers, look at the burglars, look at all those people. They're the problem. When was the last time that you actually saw a TV show or a film that said, oh yeah, the banker is being really crooked? I think the last one I saw was on Miami Vice, where they were talking about this Wall Street bank, where the guy's just saying, look, we got to let the drugs flow or we're all going to go out of business. Maybe one of the reasons why Michael Mann was encouraged to move on in his career shortly after that episode. And it's a culture of criminality, and it's a culture of fraud. And the government is completely complicit with it, and that is the exact definition of a fascist economic dictatorship. When the financial corporations and the government power are aligned together against the general public, which is you. Interesting little story over at 12160. Why can't students borrow at the same rates as banks? We've all been talking about this huge problem. These poor kids, they have gone to college, they've gone into debt in these student loans, $100,000 debt, $150,000 debt when they come out of university, and the jobs they were told would be waiting for them aren't there. And the loan interest rates are fairly high, bordering on usurious, and yet these Wall Street firms are borrowing millions, billions of dollars from the Federal Reserve at close to 0%. Why shouldn't our students, on whom our future depends, be getting the same break? And it's a valid question to ask. Now, Pope Francis is starting to come out and make his policy statements, and he's basically come out and denounced the global financial system as a cult of money. And this is a direct quote from him. Money has to serve, not to rule. I am really starting to like this guy. And I hope the bankers don't serve him their special Pope John Paul I cup of tea. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as people pour through that new round of released emails from the White House, very interesting fact has come to light. The entire justification for the Department of Justice to go after the Associated Press's phone records and to tap the telephones in the United States Congress itself rested on this idea that there was a report on an article on a foiled al-Qaeda bomb plot or bomb threat that AP got a hold of. And what's now coming out here is that the Central Intelligence Agency approved this report for publication by the Associated Press. So there was no actual crime. It's just casting that wide net. I really do think it's all about, we've got a paranoid president just like Richard Nixon, just obsessed with secrecy and controlling the leaks and making sure the American media and the American people only get what the White House says, no dissenting view, no contradictory information allowed. So, anyway. Alrighty, let's see. We're seeing more and more report about Russia and the BRICS nations setting up their own bank, their own trade currency, and it's being spun in the American media as a direct threat against the U.S. dollar. Well, the dollar is clearly in decline. There's no question about that. And it is a self-made decline because every private central bank is a Ponzi scheme, and sooner or later, every Ponzi scheme collapses. That's just the way it is. But as I've said many times before, the Federal Reserve and the federal government are not willing to stand up there and say, boy, we really screwed this one up, didn't we? They're looking for somebody to blame, whether it's Iranian hackers or the rest of it. And so we're starting to see this propaganda campaign that Russia and the BRICS aren't doing what they're doing just for their own commerce. Now it's a direct assault on the dollar. The dollar system is under threat from Russia and all these other countries. So they're demonizing Russia, and this is a really dangerous idea to literally risk open war, potentially nuclear, with Russia and China to prop up this little piece of ink and paper. That's what it's really all about. Now, getting over to Boeing, and boy, oh boy, if I actually had any Boeing stock, I would be selling it right about now. There has been yet another problem with the 787 Dreamliner over at Nippon Airways. They were doing a test flight to see if they'd fix the problems with the batteries and the landing gear and the windows popping out, and they had a fire on board from a power distribution board. It triggered a fire alarm. It did not trigger the smoke alarm. When they landed the jet, they found this entire power distribution panel was blackened by heat. And so this airplane and Boeing used to be a really great company till the money junkies took it over. And the 787, the flying public is very fickle. It only takes a few problems for people to say, I don't want to be on that plane. The L-1011, good aircraft until it flew into a swamp. That turned out to be pilot error. The DC-10, it's still in service, but for a long time it had a hard way of going because of that horrible crash on TV up there in Chicago, which turned out to be a maintenance problem. Michael Crichton actually wrote a very interesting book called Airframe, which I doubt will ever get made into a movie, although it would make a good movie, where he talks a lot about this stuff, about deregulation and financial pressures driving the industry in a bad direction here. Alrighty, I want to get on to the issues of the government spying, not just on Associated Press, not just on the Congress, but on you. There's been a very alarming court ruling by a federal magistrate judge in New York that basically came down and said that unless you turn your cell phone off, you have no expectation of privacy regarding your location, and government can track you by your cell phone, and presumably the shopping malls can too. They're starting to do that without a warrant, without probable cause, without justification. They can simply tap into their computers, and either through the GPS system or the triangulation of the cellular towers, they can find out where you are, and they don't need a warrant. You are not protected by the Fourth Amendment if your cell phone is turned on. Now, as it turns out, there are commercially available devices that will jam the GPS signal and leave the telephone running. You still can be triangulated on the cell towers, but that's not quite as accurate. Now, I just heard from an expert in these issues that the FCC has now declared any GPS jammers to be illegal, because if the FBI is going to put a GPS tracker on your car, not that they need one as long as you're carrying your cell phone, by golly, you will not interfere. So we're really getting into this police state. They want to have constant cameras on you, GPS tracking, listening to you through the microphone in your cell phone. And it's kind of a double standard because they're trying to shut down going the other way. Now, we know that there have been many, many court rulings that basically take the same principle. If you're out in public, you have no expectation of privacy. And the courts have said the same applies to government officials and the police. When they're out in public doing their job on the taxpayer dollar, they have no expectation of privacy. And it is legal to take pictures and video and recordings of the police when they're doing things they ought not to be doing. Apparently there's a big stink about a YouTube video where this police officer is simply grabbing this kid by the throat and saying, "I'm going to beat the blank out of you and throw your blank in jail." And the police departments don't like that. And apparently up in Illinois, and this is going to turn out to be a test case, a guy named Michael Allison is looking at 75 years in prison for 5 counts of recording law enforcement officials without their consent. And what Illinois is doing, it's a very loose application of their eavesdropping law, where it says you may not record a conversation or a video unless both parties are informed. But the context of that law was telephones, where you do have an expectation of privacy, not out in public where everybody is there. Oh. And so this is going to turn out to be a test case, but this guy just took photos, videos of police doing things they ought not to be doing, looking at 75 years in jail. We're going to take a phone call. Tom in Pennsylvania, and I apologize for keeping you waiting. I actually lost track of you on my little text screen here. What's on your mind?
Well, I don't know. I've come up with a whole bunch of different things because as we first got on the phone with you, by the way, good day, sir.
Yes.
Tom in Valley Forge. I just happen to have with me another Tom, the one who broke the Justice Roberts Irish adoption story that I think you posted up on your website a while back.
Mm-hmm.
Him and I have been brainstorming on this Benghazi thing, and we've got a couple of theories here. I have a sneaking suspicion that this IRS issue that's come out about harassing the conservatives may have been done intentionally to sidetrack the attention to Benghazi.
I agree. I absolutely agree, but it's now exploded into its own scandal, and it's gone out of control.
Yeah, but I think the reason also is that I think Obama will take the bullet for any of these. That's you know what I mean? Not literally. To protect Hillary in case she decides she wants to run, they want to try to keep her out of this as much as they can so that she can just, feign ignorance and innocence and then go run for president possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole thing in Benghazi is that my thought was that maybe this whole thing wasn't Obama's idea. This may have been the people over there in the Middle East idea to do this, to kidnap this guy and then trade him for the sheep.
Well, I disagree. I disagree, and the reason for that is it's already been established that the stand-down orders for the CIA and Special Forces came from the White House. It was reported that during the confrontation at the consulate, there was a Predator drone overhead, real-timing the video to the White House, and Predator drones are not very fast. I think their top speed is something like 137 miles an hour, which means the drone was deployed to the consulate before the violence started. And so that firmly puts control, command, and communication within the U.S. government itself. And that's why this idea that somebody else did this in the Middle East, certainly in response to that ludicrous trailer, that really does not fit the available facts.
No, Michael, I'm not saying he didn't know about it. I'm just saying I don't think he came up with it originally. I think possibly that they had put this thing together, and he's watching, and if the whole thing went the way they wanted it to, then everything was fine. But when it went south, they said, look, you stand down, don't you come and kill our people, or we'll blow the whistle on you for either A, knowing about it, or B, we're going to tell them who you really are and where all that burger stuff. So,
well,
what was the Turkish ambassador doing there? Why was he there? Is he the middleman between them and Syria?
Well, again, there's allegations that facility was being used for the transfer of weapons. A lot of the weapons used in the overthrow of Libya were being covertly sent over to Syria. And obviously that would involve Turkey because those weapons are taken into Syria over the Turkish border. But again, your alternate theory to what was going on here, what I'm not seeing is a really clear motive why to disrupt whatever was going on in that consulate with this attack on the ambassador. It really does make much more sense that this did originate within the White House. Certainly Obama had a motive to try something to rebuild his sagging fortunes in the election season.
Tom, my other buddy here, Tom, got a comment for you.
Okay.
The blind chink is a curious thing that they've not reacted to. We know that they began the attack with a plan. We know that the Turkish ambassador left, and almost immediately thereafterwards, the attack began. And then all of a sudden, other people are being told to stand down rather than interfere with the attack. So they wanted to obtain a goal. Somebody wanted to obtain a goal by having the attack occur and not responding to it.
That's exactly what my theory is. The goal was to create an incident that was going to captivate the American media and allow Obama to look like, to basically prove he was not the new Jimmy Carter, wasn't going to let it deteriorate into a dragged-out hostage situation. I think that was the goal and the agenda right from the beginning. It explains the stand-down. It explains the overhead predator. And it explains how what went wrong was all the Libyans living around there heard the gunfire and joined in, turning this carefully staged, managed performance into an uncontrolled riot. The ambassador got killed. That comes down as a major failure in the eyes of the media and the American people, and that's why they've been trying to backpedal and cover it up ever since.
Mike, how about the fact that the ambassador's body was taken by these supposed terrorists to a hospital? And it seems that hospital was apparently managed or controlled by that al-Sharia group or whatever that was doing the terrorist attacks.
Well, hang on. Let me respond to your comment. The fact that these so-called terrorists took the ambassador to the hospital tells us, they knew that if he was going to die, the whole operation was going to be blown. That's consistent with this stage-managed election stunt as well. They needed him alive. They needed him alive because the goal was to have this building drama in the corporate media. Oh, hostage crisis, hostage crisis. They've got the ambassador, and then Obama sends the SEAL team in, rescues the ambassador, and he looks like a hero for the election. Remember Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And we're going to get back onto some of these other stories that we're seeing here right now. Let's see. Right now in Peru, there are representatives of 11 governments meeting, attempting to find some way they can control the Internet. Now, the overt explanation is, of course, we must protect copyrights. We have to deal with the content pirates. But we know what the real agenda is. Governments that rule their population with lies, fraud, deceptions, propaganda are not able to function in the age of the Internet. The Internet has changed the fundamental nature of information flow in society as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And what we're seeing as a reaction from the established power structure today mirrors almost exactly the reaction of the established power structure during Gutenberg's time. Try and get it under control. Try and keep the population away from these affordable books. And it's not going to work today any more than it worked before. The environment, the information environment has changed. And those entities able to evolve to meet the new realities will survive. Those entities that cannot are doomed to go extinct. And the problem with the United States of America is the government is trapped by the accumulation of 200 years of fraud and deception that they must continue to reinforce with, or risk delegitimizing themselves. And because of that burden of accumulated lies, they can't change. They can't stand up and say, you're right, we've been lying to you for the last 200 years, but we promise we're going to do better. Nobody's going to go for that. So they're trying to figure out some way They can control the internet because the net nannies aren't really working. I actually got an email earlier today. Apparently somebody was waiting in a hospital in London, and in the waiting room they were using the Wi-Fi, and my website's blocked. It contains objectionable content. It's probably my articles about SSRIs. Anyway, I want to talk about the tyrannies that is being sold to children in our public school system. And it all came out of this story from HispanicallySpeakingNews.com about a student named Sarah Bustamantes, 12 years old. And other students were picking on her and saying that she smelled funny, so she took out her little spray bottle of perfume and she sprayed herself. Nobody else. And the teacher called the police. And this 12-year-old girl was arrested for spraying perfume on herself. And this article goes on to say that in 2010, Texas police handed out 300,000 Class C misdemeanor tickets to school children as young as 6 years old. What are they turning these schools into? They're launching the police state in our educational system. Don't do anything, you'll get a ticket. Don't stand up, you'll get a ticket. Don't dress different, you'll get a ticket. Don't put perfume on, you'll get a ticket. Don't point your finger at somebody and go bang, you'll get expelled. If you want to look at the future of our nation as the money junkies want it, you go look at this abuse of our kids in these educational indoctrination centers. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Dan is now in our control room, ready to answer the phones. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. A little bit of good news coming out. We were talking about this incident down in Florida where this young girl, star pupil, science enthusiast, looking forward to a wonderful life, conducted a little bit of a science demonstration outside the school, not in the buildings, away, did it safely, resulted in a little bit of a poof, if you will. The only damage was to an 8-ounce plastic water bottle that she was using as the test vessel. Kicked out of school and arrested 2 weeks ago. Well, the good news is the courts realized this was just a kid experimenting with science. No harm intended, and the charges have all been dropped. This teenager is now attending classes at an alternate school and may be allowed to go back to the school where she was. And it's another reminder of this incredible, intense overreaction to just crush the kids down. So they're not thinking experimentally, they're not thinking outside the U.S. federal government-approved curriculum. And that's why I keep saying our educational system is not about education any longer. It's about indoctrination. I mean, they're pounding into these kids constantly, global warming, you're all to blame, you will grow up to pay carbon taxes, and you will grow up to obey a global environmental authority, even as it's obvious that whole global warming nonsense was a load of crap. But they're just pounding on these kids, and this idea of the police coming in and arresting kids for spraying themselves with perfume, what is the rationale for that? I want to even see the law under which they wrote that ticket. They're bringing about the police state, starting with our kids. And we have to be angry and alarmed about that. These kids don't deserve to be treated this way. Nobody in America does, but especially the kids. What kind of adults are they going to grow up into being treated like this? And then you go back to the history books and you look at how the schools were treating the kids in Nazi Germany, and you see a lot of similarities. Just obey. Do what you're told. Never question authority. It's the same model all over again. I think the U.S. government is using Dictatorship for Dummies, authored by Adolf Hitler. Now, we've been talking about all these officers, these sexual harassment prevention officers in the military. They're getting arrested for sexual harassment. And the latest embarrassment is down at Fort Hood in Texas, where the U.S. military officer overseeing sexual harassment prevention is now under investigation for running a prostitution ring. Oh, boy, boy. Army strong. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a little announcement. John Stadmiller is back in the building. He's healthy. He took his vitamins. He took his Extendivite. And he's Stadmiller is in the building. And he's tanned, rested, and ready. And he's going to be doing his regular show following my show today. So stick around because I'm sure he's got a lot to say about all this insanity that's going on. Speaking of insanity, we just heard an announcement, or read an announcement, rather, from the National Foundation for Gun Rights. Their nonprofit filing with the IRS has been waiting 19 months. So gun groups are being targeted by the IRS to delay their nonprofit status. This thing is growing wider and wider. And I think what happened is, in order to distract away from Benghazi, and I am more and more convinced that is the heart of the evil, Obama had Lois Lerner leak this thing about the IRS delaying nonprofit status for the Tea Party. Figured it was a minor scandal, but the media would scamper after that, and Benghazi would become a side issue and a side story and fade away. Not going to happen. And now we're finding out the IRS was doing this across the board to anybody that stood for anything the president did not want. And now we're hearing it from the National Foundation for Gun Rights. Their application has just been sitting at the IRS for 19 months. Remember, the average turnaround time for an IRS to process, or for the IRS to process a tax-exempt application is 90 days. 3 months. They got the tax-exempt status for the charity run by Obama's half-brother through in just 30 days. And so this thing has definitely blossomed out. It's getting wider and wider. It is extended beyond the mere processing of tax-exempt status applications into outright targeted audits. We're hearing from people all across the country. So this little scandal they were going to use to hide the bigger scandal has turned into a big scandal all by itself. And the Department of Justice surveillance of this Associated Press, which we now know was completely groundless, was supposed to scare the media back into staying silent and complicit, backfired mightily on them. This thing is really, really taking off here. I'm going to get into some science and health news. Interesting story over at Mercola.com. Middle-aged Americans, thank goodness I'm out of that age bracket, are now committing suicide at an unprecedented rate. In fact, more middle-aged Americans are dying by their own hand than die in automobile accidents, which is a major, major killer. And the point of this article is these prescription antidepressants, these SSRIs, which we know have a well-documented history of violence and suicide in the patients. It turns out, going back and looking at the original trials for their approval, the SSRIs did not cure depression any more than the placebos given to the control group. We know about the placebo effect. You're given a pill that's sugar and they say, this is going to make you feel better, and you say, yeah, I feel better. It's a fact of life. And now they're finding out that the claimed success rate for these SSRI antidepressants was actually no better than the placebo group. In other words, there doesn't seem to be any proof they actually do what they're supposed to do. And yet they have these horrible, horrible side effects. But they make money, and that is why you will go on taking your pills. And under the press of all these doctors prescribing for attention deficit disorder, and they just hand these things out, they're handed out like candy to our troops. 10% of the population are on these things. It is triggering violence, suicide, bizarre, erratic behavior, including the White House planning staff, I think. And we'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And this IRS thing is just cascading out of control. We're seeing over at Newsmax.com that the Internal Revenue Service targeted the Catholic League. And it's just insane out over there. Now, let's see. Over at theblaze.com, they're reporting a story that many of these targeted groups are now starting to consider legal action, and apparently members of the Kentucky 912 Project, Richmond Tea Party, Ohio Liberty are meeting with the American Center for Law and Justice in Washington, D.C. to discuss plans to mount civil lawsuits against the Internal Revenue Service for their now admitted intimidation and targeting. I think everybody who's been a victim of this ought to sue the IRS, and I think we ought to demand that the individual IRS people themselves pay this, pay the settlements. Because you know what the IRS will do? They'll simply take more money from the American people and use it to pay the court settlements. And that does not send the message that we need to have sent. So if Obama was hoping this IRS thing was going to get him out of trouble for Benghazi, it didn't work. It absolutely did not work here. All right, getting back to science and health issues. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Got about 50 minutes to go on today's show here. I linked to a documentary, actually a part of one. The documentary is called Food Matters, and this was part 3. And I linked to it because starting at 10 minutes into this documentary, they talk about the fact that there was a known link back in 2000 between SSRIs and strange suicides and mass violence, and they even comment on how their investigation has shown the vast majority of these mass shootings being waved at us by the gun grabbers involve perpetrators who were either on or withdrawing from these medications. And when we go back and we look at this lame attempt to claim that there was no detectable SSRIs or alcohol or illegal drugs in Adam Lanza, who, by the way, was reported to be on Fanapt, you need to remember, if somebody is withdrawing from these medications and it flips them out, of course a tox screen is not going to find the medication. The problem is they're trying to quit. The latest diagnostic manual from the American Psychiatric Association has come under continued fire from all across the psychiatric profession. And people are saying, don't buy it, don't use it, don't teach it. The National Institutes of Mental Health have just renounced this thing. It attempts to take every single aspect of human behavior and categorize it as a disease. If you enjoy sex too much, that's a disease. We have a pill for that. You're suffering sexual addiction. South Park did a very, very funny takedown of that whole idea. They want to turn everything you do into a disease for which they will sell you a pill. You know, human nature is we're volatile, emotional people. We react to things. Sometimes we have emotional reactions just to the food that we eat. It's a very complex system. And they want to come in and just sell you another pill. And in the case of the SSRIs, they can't actually prove they're really helping depression, and they are these demonstrated side effects. But as long as it makes money under the U.S. federal government, it's okay to sell it. Going to go back to the phones here. Tim in New Mexico. Aloha. Tim, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just had a quick one, too, that I hadn't heard you mention to add to the IRS scandal thing was the seizing of the 10 million patients' health records. I guess it was California, was it?
Yeah, including all of the California state judges.
Correct. So, I mean, there's another major one, because what do they need that information for? Except maybe to build a database, possibly test algorithms to analyze healthcare records based on when they take control of Obamacare. But other than that, what do they need 10 million... Which is illegitimate anyway, but why would they do that, you know?
Well, so under Obamacare, there is medical records that the IRS is authorized to have and a legal mechanism for them to acquire them. They simply went out and literally looted these databases of medical records to grab it all. And they weren't authorized to do that. They don't need that information. And the problem is, the thing that really alarms me about the fact that they specifically went after all the California judges is it gives them a blackmail database. You know, they were really embarrassed when Judge James C. Fox actually stated in the court record for Sullivan versus United States that the 16th Amendment wasn't actually ratified. And now the IRS wants to be able to go into any tax law cases, and they talk to the judge and say, oh, Judge, you had syphilis here. Wouldn't want that to get out here. You better rule the way we want you to rule. Yeah. That's a good one. I like that. Anything else?
Okay. Anyway, that's about all I had for the moment. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. And moving right on back to the health and safety news here. Vermont may become the first state to require labeling of genetically modified food. They're working on their version of California Proposition 37, and it's not a done deal, and we already know Monsanto will be up there with all their lobbyists and all their bribe money trying to keep this thing from happening because they don't want you to have the freedom to choose whether you're going to eat their products or not. And that's dictatorship. Even Hitler didn't tell the German people, you must eat this corn and not this other corn. Meanwhile, over in Hungary, which is one of the nations that has now banned GMO, they're taking the additional step. They are destroying every single corn field that had Monsanto's GMO corn on it. They're going to basically bulldoze it, destroy the pollen. That's the thing they're really scared about, is this pollen blowing in the wind or being carried by birds and insects and contaminating natural varieties of corn. So they're literally just scraping this stuff out and throwing it away. And as I mentioned yesterday, Peru has now passed a 10-year ban on all GM foods. They know this stuff is dangerous. They know it's harmful. They've seen that French study. But in the United States of America, anything that makes money is okay to sell you, even if it's bad for you. Because after all, if it's bad for you, that opens up another economic opportunity with the medical establishment. If we sell you products that make you sick, it's going to stimulate the economy because you're going to rush right down to your doctor and complain about that extra hand growing out the middle of your forehead. And the doctor will have a pill for it or a surgical procedure. That's not how you run an economy. It's not how you run a nation. If you want a healthy, robust economy, you have to present to your population a possible, brighter future that they can work toward. But if you keep dangling that hope in front of them and keep denying it with planned obsolescence, bad products, excess taxation and regulation, sooner or later the population gets frustrated and they quit. That's a big part of what's gone wrong with this country. People have lost hope. People are in despair across this country. And pretty speeches from a president who has to rely on a teleprompter are not going to change that. As long as we are enslaved to that private central bank that sees it as their divine right to grow insanely rich on the work of ordinary people, the ordinary people are going to get tired and quit and give up. So they'll send their minions out there with their cat o' nine tails to flog the slaves to work harder in the fields, but that doesn't really work. The antebellum South proved it. Economically, despite the fact that they had all those slaves working out there, they couldn't compete economically with the North. Major reason the Confederacy lost the war. We're all slaves now to the Federal Reserve. And that's why these private central banks destroy any country that won't be enslaved to a private central bank, because they can't compete. That's what led to the war against Germany. Germany wouldn't go along with that game. And Germany's economy and industry was exploding at a rate that none of the nations with private central banks could even keep up with, because slave states cannot compete with free states. And that's why Germany had to be destroyed. That's why Libya had to be destroyed. That's why any nation freed of private central banking must be destroyed. Because a nation with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest cannot ever economically compete with nations that have a state central bank value-based currency where people are allowed to keep the product that they work for. They're allowed to keep and accrue the wealth. It incentivizes work and achievement in a way that cannot be accomplished in a slave state. So we're really literally in a war of emancipation for all mankind. Unfortunately, the United States is on the wrong side. They're on the side of the slavers. They're on the side of the private central bankers. Now, we talk about the bizarre quality or lack of quality of our established medical industry, as it were, and there's this very bizarre story that came out of Florida. It was reported in the Daily Mail over in Great Britain, where apparently this Florida Medical Center mandated Scientology classes for all their staffers. which involved things like screaming at ashtrays and staring at each other for hours and using the E-meter, which is a very primitive galvanic skin response meter that is sort of an icon, religious icon of Scientology. And I think having a hospital force a religion on its workers doesn't matter what the religion is, but in this case, I think most people understand Scientology it's a science fiction creation. Believe it or not, L. Ron Hubbard created Scientology as the result of a bet with Robert A. Heinlein, whether he could get away with it. Heinlein lost the bet. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And all of these scandals are still spinning wildly out of control. The Department of Justice has now issued a clarification that it did not actually tap the phones in the United States Congress. It merely went and surveilled all of the phone records to try and see who is talking to who. Again, without any warrant. And I imagine members of Congress are very upset, especially those who were calling their mistresses. But there's an important point that is being missed in the corporate media coverage of this, and it's called the principle of separation of powers. The Department of Justice, which is part of the executive branch, has no authority to go into the legislative branch at all. Period. End of discussion. So now Congress is very, very angry over what's going on, and they have every right to be. Boy, oh boy. I'll bet the ashtrays are flying in the White House right now. That's a reference to the Clinton years, where word got out that every time Hillary Clinton lost her temper, she'd fling an ashtray at people, and they were having to repair the holes in the walls of the White House. And we know Obama smokes, so there's probably lots of ashtrays around there as well, and he's probably grabbing and throwing those at this point. All righty, let's see some other interesting stories here. Getting back to that whole educational thing. And by the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get some callers in here for this last half hour about Benghazi and DOJ and IRS and the rest of that stuff here. Apparently, over at Wheatmore High School, they have prohibited a teenage mother. She's 17, and she has a newborn baby, and she wanted to hold the baby for her yearbook photo. And the school said, no, you're not allowed to do that because it might promote teenage pregnancy. These school officials are obviously so old they don't remember what they were like when they were teenagers, because nobody needs to promote teenage pregnancy or sexuality. It kind of happens all by itself. And if you're not willing to deal with that and acknowledge it, if you treat your students as these little robotic drones who will do and think what you tell them to do, you're going to be disappointed. I want to share a little story with you where all of this control agenda comes from. Most of modern liberal political philosophy is founded on the idea that environment basically determines what kind of a person you will grow up to be. It's the old nature versus nurture or environment versus evolution argument. It's been going back and forth for, well, as long as humans have stood up and thought, how did I get here? And a lot of it goes back to Margaret Sanger, who wrote a book, Coming of Age in Samoa, which is hailed as a foundation document of modern liberalism. And she is lionized as this academic star, second only to, well, Stephen Hawking. And what Margaret Sanger did is she decided she wanted to go out and find some way to prove that environment, rather than heredity, controls your psychological makeup. And so she basically went to Samoa, which even today it's isolated, but back then it was really isolated. And she wanted to basically prove that young people in Samoa would transition into adulthood without the angst and upset and emotionality that we see within our own culture. And she went down to Samoa, and she basically wrote this book saying it was a very sexually promiscuous culture, and because everybody was very relaxed about sex, adolescence was stress-free relative to the United States of America at the time. And the book was completely flat out wrong. Margaret basically made friends with two Samoan women, and she started asking them leading questions. And the Samoan women who did not understand what Margaret Sanger was going to do with all of this information, they just told her what Margaret obviously wanted to hear. They were just talking story. You know, you want to talk about this happening? Oh, yeah, sure, okay, fine. And the biggest mistake that Margaret Sanger made was declaring the Samoan culture to be sexually promiscuous, because Hawaii at the time was sexually promiscuous. But the Samoan culture is rigidly monogamous. And Sanger missed that completely. It's one of the most glaring errors in her book. The government of Samoa actually tracked down these two women that Sanger had talked to. And they basically said, yeah, we just told her what she said she wanted to hear, and we didn't know what she was going to do with it. And so this whole liberal idea that you can reshape the human psyche by changing the environment around them lacks any kind of a factual foundation. Now, people used to talk about how so much of the DNA passed from parents to children appeared to be junk and unused. Junk DNA was a phrase that you saw in microbiology a lot. Well, now they're coming to understand that that DNA doesn't influence your physical development. It carries the operating software for your mind and body from parent to child. When we come back, I'll share with you an experiment that kind of underscores how that works. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show, and we're talking about the foundation of modern liberal philosophy being completely fraudulent. Coming of age in Samoa was completely bungled. Too many assumptions, writer's occlusion, researcher's occlusion. She came back and wrote what she wanted to see, not what was really there. So now we're talking about the so-called junk DNA that is passed from parent to child. And to understand the context of this, you need to go back to an experiment that's very often performed in biology classes, in which you will take what are called planaria, the little tiny flatworms. They're used for experiments, and you can condition them. Flash a light, give their little dish an electric shock, and then after a while, when the light flashes, they'll twitch. Then you take those planaria and you extract their RNA, the ribonucleic acid, and you feed it to new planaria who have never been subjected to the conditioning of light and electric shock. And after they absorb the RNA, they will start flinching when the light flashes. So we know memory information can be passed through these RNA or DNA molecules. I mean, when you're born, brand new into the world, your brain has to already have information in it on how to breathe, how to pump your heart, how to regulate your body. And they're starting to understand that what they used to call junk DNA is, if you want an analogy to computers, it's your firmware, it's your basic operating system, your accumulated instincts from millions of years of evolution, and it's carried forward. And liberalism says that's really not a factor, that we can re-engineer the human mind by re-engineering society around them. And every one of the experiments they've tried have failed. People still go on being people. And so that whole model of liberalism is intellectually junk. I'm an old Jeffersonian myself. That government governs best, which governs least. Now, new breaking story coming out of the Washington Times. Insert drum roll here. Retired four-star Admiral James Lyons has said there is new evidence that has surfaced regarding what happened in Benghazi. I am going to read you a direct quote from this article. Quote, with what should have been only a staged kidnapping of Ambassador J. Christian Stevens instead... I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong paragraph here. All right, this is the quote I wanted to read to you on the air. This apparent abduction by terrorists of our ambassador and then the negotiated trade for the blind sheik would have been the October surprise that would have elevated President Obama's flagging popularity and boosted his approval ratings for a re-election. A dramatic prisoner exchange that saved our ambassador's life. However, something went horribly wrong, a cunning and illegal bit of treachery by the Obama White House turned into something entirely different. Obama's October surprise turned into carnage orchestrated by the White House itself as the President, Leon Panetta, and CIA Director David Petraeus watched via unmanned aerial vehicle real-time feed as a 7-hour attack on the Benghazi embassy raged. Reportedly, stand-down orders were given several times to different units within striking distance. And he goes on in the next paragraph and says, with what should have been only a staged kidnapping of Ambassador J. Christian Stevens, instead Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty refused to stand down order and began doing their job of protecting the ambassador using force. So this 4-star admiral is saying more or less the same thing I am saying. It was a setup to boost Obama's re-election chances, and that is the great secret they're desperate to hide. And they're so desperate they'll throw the IRS out for public condemnation and class action lawsuits. They expose the Department of Justice for surveillance on the Congress and the corporate media. This is the big, deep, dark secret they're trying to keep the lid on. That the attack on the embassy in Benghazi was a staged event to boost Obama's chances for re-election. And I'm rather relieved I'm not the only one out there saying it now. All righty, let's see here. More stories about the media was using the word tapped the congressional phones, and the Department of Justice is saying no, they didn't actually tap the phones, they merely got the telephone records. But again, it is a violation of the separation of powers. They're not playing by the rules over there. What's this article here? This is over at CBS News, where they're trying to basically go back to the Boston bombing. Forget about Benghazi. Forget about that. We've got the Boston bomber, which is where this ludicrous story of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev writing this very condemning note on the side of the boat while being shot at, while bleeding. And I think right now we're seeing this kind of thrash mode, this panic, where they're just throwing stuff out there, and they're really not thinking it through. I mean, from the email that I am getting, everybody is issuing this kind of a collective, oh, come on now, over this idea that this guy wrote what amounts to a confession on the inside of the boat, and nobody bothered to mention it until just right now. And so the White House propaganda effort right now is degenerating into total chaos. Absolute total chaos. Alrighty, so we got about 20 minutes left to go on the show, and I want to go back and basically recap what I think is going on here to get the overview. My thesis is Benghazi was a staged event to make Obama look good for his re-election, and it got out of control. And it turned into this wild riot. Other Libyans were joining in. According to this admiral, these SEALs who refused the stand-down order is why the shooting started around the ambassador that led to his death. And that's a big, deep, dark secret. Nobody wants that to come out. Nobody in Washington, D.C. wants that to come out. It would destroy the whole party. Not just Obama. Not just the Democrats. Everybody gets destroyed by this. It's a great secret, like the Kennedy assassination or the 9/11 fraud. Nobody can ever talk about it. Even your worst enemy is going to be working as hard as they can to protect that secret. And so as Benghazi continues to grow and grow in congressional hearings and the media, I think the decision was made to scare the corporate media into just accepting the government's pronouncements as news, and at the same time give them a diversion, a different scandal they could go after. And I think that's why Lois Lerner last Friday basically leaked the story that the IRS was interfering with the tax-exempt status of the Tea Party. And remember, the people who were watching her speak said she was answering what was supposed to be a random question by referring to note cards, which made it look like the question was planted, and her response was written ahead of time to get that out there. So, oh, media, look, with IRS scandal, let's bash on the IRS. Everybody hates them, justifiably, I might add. And that's a scandal that the White House could survive. Only now it's expanding. More and more groups are coming forward to saying we were targeted, we were harassed, we were audited unfairly. And everybody's making the link back to Richard Nixon and how he used the IRS on his political enemies list. And we know Obama has an enemies list, although I prefer to use the name the Special High Interest Targets list. And so now the IRS became a huge scandal. Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. I thought we'd already taken your call, and if you want to call back, go ahead. I have to keep better track of the callers here. All right, so the IRS scandal is now exploding. And this surveillance of the reporters, back in 2006 when they did it to ABC, it sort of calmed them all down and got them back on the reservation. Not this time. It's backflashed on them. And so we're seeing this cascade of fraud, on cover-up, on abuse of power, and it's rapidly spinning out of control. And I think this is why Barack Obama is really desperate right now for a distraction, whether it's Syria or Iran or a mushroom cloud somewhere inside the United States of America. I can smell the panic. All the way over here in Oahu, I can smell the panic coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think basically that's what it's all about. They're trying to use a new scandal to cover up an old scandal, and it's really not working very well at all because they're misjudging the public mood. They're misreading how Americans are feeling about what's going on in the country. And that tells me we have a White House that is really seriously out of touch with the general population. Of course, they're sitting on top of layers and layers of all these government lackeys who are, getting comfortable, huge salaries, and, they're always going to tell the boss what the boss wants to hear, not what he needs to know. And so you've got this situation where their own staffs are blinding them to what's really going on. Remember the legend of King Arthur and Merlin the magician, which historically it appears to be two completely separate legends that were sort of welded together somewhere down the road. But from a sociological point of view, Merlin's value to King Arthur was that Merlin wasn't really a part of the court system. And Merlin could travel anywhere in society, the Camelot or just down in the ordinary villages. And Merlin's value to King Arthur was that Merlin provided to Arthur an unvarnished, unbiased, unpoliticized view of what was going on in the kingdom. And Obama doesn't have that. He's effectively deaf, dumb, and blind relative to the ordinary American people. He is kept that way by his own enablers, his flappers. Going to go to the phones here. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, did I hear you say that you've seen nothing wrong with girls having a picture in the yearbook with their babies? Did you say that?
I said basically, I disagreed with the decision because it's not promoting teen pregnancy and sexual activity. Nobody needs to promote it. It happens all by itself. And I was putting it up there as an example of just how tyrannical our public school indoctrination centers are becoming in terms of trying to brainwash our kids into just being these little carbon copy drones of each other, never think, never do. Now, obviously, I'm opposed to teen pregnancy. I think the way to deal with that is recognize that teenagers are really in the grip of their hormonal influences, and, they should make birth control available to them. I would prefer things like condoms that don't disrupt the biochemistry of the women, but if this high school student is a mother and has a baby, and she wants the baby to be part of the picture, I really do have an issue with the school saying, no, you cannot.
Okay, Michael, let me say what I want to say. What's wrong with a gay person having their friend in their picture, or a person having their dog, or their lizard, or their snake, or anything like that? Now, I mean, hey.
In my opinion, absolutely nothing.
You're opening the door, Michael. You're opening the door,
I think it's perfectly okay. You know why? Because it captures an aspect of that person over and above what they simply look like. I mean, I had my picture in my high school yearbook. I had my camera gear with me because I was a yearbook photographer. Another picture, I'm there with one of my astronomical telescopes. It tells you something about the person beyond what they look like and how much of a slave they were to the fashion and hair dictates of the day. I think having, some aspect of your personal life as part of your yearbook picture, I think it's a really good idea. Whether it's a guitar, a banjo, a clarinet. I think it should be done.
Well, I just think we need to put a line someplace with the scruples in this country that people need to think twice before they do things like this, because we're just opening the door to everything. And I have respect for other people's thoughts. I respect other people's lifestyle, but I don't think that I should have to buy a yearbook with my child's picture in it and with some varmint or some other person in it. There's got to be a limit someplace, Michael, and that's just how I feel.
Well, obviously, you're welcome. Thank you for the call, and absolutely I disagree with you on this issue, because, I'm one of these people who sees every human being as a unique individual who has their own personality, their own interests, their own point of view on life. I reject the idea of forcing our children into these predefined molds and cramming them down and whacking them on the head with a hammer until they conform to what's supposed to be there. And I personally, I don't have a problem if I were fortunate enough to have children, which I'm not, one of the biggest disappointments in my life, and the kid came home with the yearbook, I would admire my kid's photo in that yearbook, and that would kind of be the end of it. I got to be very honest with you. Most people don't look in the yearbook beyond their own child's pictures. And so what is in the other pictures really is not going to be a factor. And so, yeah, I know in my yearbook all the band members posed with their musical instruments for their yearbook photos. It tells you something about them beyond what they look like. And I think it's a really good idea. And I know people have a problem with teenage pregnancy, and I do too, but it did happen, and it's part of her life. So let's not punish her, certainly not the baby, for let's just adapt and move forward. And I'm really very concerned. Our educational system, our public educational system, doesn't educate anymore. Our academic scores compared to other countries are just in a free fall. And our schools have turned into these indoctrination centers to just say to the kid, be exactly like everybody else. Salute the flag. Fight global warming. Be ready to go into the military and kill the enemy. Don't do anything else. Don't experiment. Don't think outside the box. Don't read anything other than what we tell you. Don't think anything other than what we tell you. That's not an environment. If I had a kid, I would not have them in public school. And I know more and more states are now starting to pass laws saying you cannot homeschool. They're saying homeschooling is not a right. We, the state, own your children, and we will decide how they think. At the very least, I'd put my kid in a private school. And I'd go to the private school and I'd look at it and see what they were doing and how they were teaching the kids here. But if I had a kid, I would not put them in the public school system of the United States of America. And part of that comes out of my own experience teaching in public school many years ago in Southern California. I taught a year of high school remedial math. And I got along great with the kids. It was the administration that was just horrible. So, anyway, now that we've had our little distraction du jour, we're coming up here on our last commercial break. We need to get the story about Benghazi out there, and what you probably ought to do, this is your assignment for tonight, speaking of school class, take that article about that 4-star admiral who's saying essentially the same thing that I'm doing, and please forward it to all your social media and all your network of friends. Because that's the big black secret at the heart of all these overlapping scandals. They're trying to confuse the issue and destroy the focus. The focus is Benghazi and Obama's October surprise. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show, and I need to start off with a correction. It was Margaret Mead who wrote Coming of Age in Samoa. Margaret Sanger, I've got my Margarets confused today. Margaret Sanger was the eugenicist who was promoting the idea of race hygiene, which later became the inspiration for some of what the Nazis were doing. I want to get back to this issue of Benghazi and all of these gates and scandals that are coming on, because we're in a case of dueling scandal. We have a White House that realizes the potential for exposure about what they were really doing in Benghazi. And now we have this retired four-star admiral coming out and saying more or less the same thing I'm saying. This was a staged event, Obama's October surprise to guarantee his reelection, and it got botched and went horribly wrong. And now we're seeing the IRS scandal as a distraction, except that's now exploding. The announced surveillance of the corporate media and the Congress to try and get everybody to just toe the official line, and it's all cascading out of control. But if you are confronted with all kinds of contrasting events and distractions and noise, and you want to know what's really going on, you look for the part of maximum overlap. You look for the place where all the distractions and denials and cover-ups and lies are coming together. That's the heart of what's really going on. You look for that most protected point. And that is where you dig to find the treasure. And that most protected point in all of this network of distractions and competing scandals is Benghazi. And everything I have heard up to this point only reinforces mine and now this four-star admiral's theory. This was all staged to allow Barack Obama to grandstand what a great president he was. He wasn't the new Jimmy Carter. He was going to act decisively and prevent another drawn-out hostage situation. And it went out of control. And now they're trying to bury it. They're trying to say it's just a side story. They want it to go away. It's refusing to go away. And that's why we're seeing all these other bits of noise being waved as a distraction, and they are now cascading out of control as well. I'll tell you right now, the White House is in an absolute blind panic. There is nothing they will not do to distract from this whole mess that they've concocted for themselves, up to and including starting yet another war. And in that, I think they are also continuing to misread the reaction and feelings of the American people. We're not going to respond to the new lies the way we responded to the old lies, because we know they're lies. They're still playing these propaganda games by the rules that worked at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, but it isn't the 1950s and 1960s any longer. And we are a sadder but wiser population that knows our government and corporate media lie to us about everything. Saddam's nukes, global warming, the safety and efficacy of SSRIs. We're skeptical, and therein lies our path to freedom from the liars. That's it for our show. Going to head on out of here and get some things done. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. A reminder, please support Republic Broadcasting. We do not have millions of dollars of corporate support to feed you what the corporations want you to think. The only way we're going to defeat the big money corruption is for the little money to unite together in the cause of restoring the Republic. So go on over to republicbroadcasting.org and hit that donate button. Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.